So now that we've invested at this very high level in our diagnostic phase, the baton gets passed to our supervision units. And I want to talk about three primary changes that we think we're going to experience on our supervision teams. The first being that we will be starting supervision at appropriate levels based on risk. The second, we will be introducing basic supervision protocols, including orientation and goal-directed approaches, irrespective of someone's risk level. And last but not least, we will be replacing MI 2202, which most people should know is our management instruction on response to defendant conduct, with a framework of options that will leverage our staff's knowledge, skills, and experience. So let's first kind of talk about starting supervision at appropriate levels based on risk. This really dovetails with what I just talked about at our diagnostic phase. In our diagnostic phase, if we are setting what we will call floor conditions for individuals, that leaves our supervision officers with the flexibility and freedom to adjust those conditions based on observed conduct of the defendant. We're making a prediction, right? The diagnostic phase, you're predicting what does this person need to be successful. When you get to supervision, you're actually responding to real conduct that you're observing, okay? So our diagnostic officers are going to do their best job at predicting how to make this person successful. Our supervision officers are going to kick in, and they're not just predicting, they're actually looking and observing conduct, and they will be adjusting supervision approaches based on what they're seeing, okay? Diagnostic is a prediction, supervision is response to observed actual conduct. And so when our diagnostic officers pass the baton off, and they've given us a better starting point for supervision, it allows our officers to modulate supervision based on what they're seeing. When I use the word modulate, I often get asked, what are you talking about when you say you want us to modulate supervision? Behind these words is a risk dial, right? You see the risk dial. That symbol was picked intentionally because a dial is used to turn things up or down. If you think about a volume dial, if I'm listening to the radio and I like what I hear, I'm going to turn it up because I want to hear more of it. But if it's not something that I'm interested in hearing, I'm going to turn it down because I'm not trying to hear as much of it. That is exactly what we're talking about when we're talking about modulating supervision. For example, using the example that we had before, report to PSA as directed. The defendant's initial reporting schedule will be once per week in person. If an individual is compliant with that schedule, we may keep the volume exactly where it is. But if they do not report as required, and they are at the higher end of our risk spectrum, we're going to turn the dial up and probably ask them to report more frequently with a different level of intensity. Is everybody with me when I say that, when I explain? That's what I mean by modulating supervision. If, however, you have someone reported to pretrial in person once per week and they are doing well, you have the option of turning the volume down. You can then say to that individual, okay, you've made it to me every time you're supposed to come to me, you're otherwise compliant with everything we're asking you to do. Why don't we dial this back a bit? Come see me every 2 weeks. If they're able to sustain compliance there, come see me once a month. Or you may say, call me every 2 weeks. That's what we mean by modulating supervision based on risk level, okay? So we will be starting supervision at appropriate levels to give our officers the flexibility to dial up or dial down based on observed conduct. What is happening now is that we are starting everyone up here. And when you start everyone up here, there's no room to modulate for non-compliance. So what do we have to go back and do? Ask the court to remove them from PSA supervision, because we've already maxed them out. And while we have over 70, almost 75% concurrence, meaning the court concurs with what we ask at C10, 70 to 75% of the time. Do you know how often they agree with us when we ask for removal from supervision? What percentage? Just call it up. 30, 33, 20, 12. 12%. That was based on FY, I think, 18 numbers when we ran the analysis. 12% of the time when we ask the court to remove someone from supervision for non-compliance with what we're asking them to do, they agree with us 12% of the time. And while I don't ever know that we'll get that number up to 70 or 80, I think we have a long way to go. And by starting people at the appropriate point, we have a greater chance of being able to convince judges of the wisdom of our request when we're able to show that we worked a chain. Hey, they came into us at this. When they didn't comply, we moved to that. When they didn't comply again, we moved to this. And they're still not complying. So now, given the story that we're telling you about this person, plus their risk level, we're asking you to take them off of supervision. And I think that's a much more compelling case that we'll be able to make when we start people at the right point. The second change that we think is going to impact our supervision teams would be that we're going to introduce basic supervision protocols, including orientation and goal-directed approaches, irrespective of risk. So much of what I've been talking about really depends on your risk level, right? So whether you dial someone up or dial someone down is going to be dependent on how risky they are. This second piece is really going to be done independent of risk. It's just going to be a part of our just generic supervision practices. In some of our specialty programs, drug court and HISP right now, you all are familiar with the concept of orientation. This concept is going to be broadened out and will be introduced for every person under supervision. And that simply means that for everyone who enters supervision with us, we will have an initial appointment with them where we are going to go over the requirements for supervision. We're going to explain our role in helping them be successful on supervision. We're going to explain the defendant's obligations. We're going to talk about what can we do to make you most successful? Who are the members of your team that we can rely on so that if you're struggling, who can I reach out to help you be successful? And conversely, if something's going on, who can I ask to help me hold you accountable? Orientation is really just a setting point of a starting point to set expectations. And everyone across the board will have that regardless of the type of supervision you're on, regardless of your supervision release conditions, okay? Just simply an introductory appointment. Best practices show that when you have that initial engagement with someone, the likelihood of success increases because of the strength of that relationship. So that's why we're introducing that. And again, that's going to be irrespective of your risk. The second thing that we're doing is we're introducing what we call goal-directed approaches. And goal-directed approaches simply means this. It sounds very fancy, but it really just means this. That means that every contact with any individual under supervision, our supervision officers are going to be reminding individuals that I have two goals here. I'm going to make sure that you don't get rearrested and that you show up for every court appearance until the next time we have contact. I'm not telling you do it until the point of your trial because for some people that might be too far in the distance to even conceptualize. This is until we meet again. I need you to make a commitment to me. Do not get rearrested. And if you have a court date in between now and then, go to that court date. Because research suggests that if you can give someone a manageable, achievable goal and you continue to repeat it to them, it becomes doable for them. Many of you all know that the Nationals won the World Series. And guess what they did? Goal-directed playing. Because guess what their motto was? Every game day. Just go 1-0 today. It wasn't win the whole series, do the next thing. It was today. Go 1-0. And that's what our officers are going to be saying to our people. Until we meet again, just go 1-0. Don't get rearrested. If you have a court date between now and then, make that court date. That's what goal-directed approaches are, and that's what we'll be utilizing. In addition, as a part of the goal-directed and our orientation, we'll be exploring challenges and barriers that people have. Do you have a problem getting here? Let's think through what your plan is. When you need to come see me or you need to go to court, how are you getting here? Let's give some thought to, will that be a challenge for you? Because guess what? Our research tells us. The vast majority of times people miss a supervision contact or a court date, it is not for willful disobedience. It is for lack of planning and preparation and means and resources. So if we can get people in the frame of mind to begin thinking about their obligations to the court and to pretrial, and begin planning to meet those obligations, we're going to see a return on that investment. So that's all that means when we're talking about introducing basic supervision protocols, orientation and goal-directed approaches, irrespective of risk. And then the last change we think we're going to experience mostly in our supervision teams, and I already alluded to it, we're going to be replacing MI 2202 with a framework of options that leverage our staff's knowledge, skills, and experience. And I have an example here, and I'll move to that slide. So again, we've already talked about starting supervision at appropriate levels and using that initial diagnostic recommendation as a starting point and modulating supervision. So we can move on to the next one. 2202 of today looks like this. It says, if this happens, then you are to do this. And this is fine. But the one thing this doesn't account for is the person's level of risk. We do this for everybody, regardless of how they were assessed up front. We treat them all this exact same way. We don't give more leeway to our least risky defendants, and we don't more quickly do things for our higher risk defendants. We use a uniform set of responses, irrespective of risk. Under our new system, we're going to take those things into account. And what we will be doing is leveraging the knowledge, the skills, the experience, the ability of our pretrial services officers, and we will be giving options for how to respond. What you see here, and again, this is not the final version, this is for demonstrative purposes only. What you see here on the left is the behavior. In this case, it was a missed supervision meeting. What you see here from end to end is a progressive list of all of the responses PSA has in its toolkit for responding to a missed supervision meeting. The list is segregated by risk level. So if I, as a PSO, have an individual under my supervision who has missed a supervision appointment and they are low risk, I can go to this top box, look at the options available to me, and select one of them. If the behavior persists, or if the incident is so egregious, with supervisory consultation, I might be able to jump to one of the top tier things in the middle box. But in general, someone who is low risk is going to get one of these lower level interventions. And you simply work the chain up. For people who start out at medium risk, you're only going to be selecting from this box. And likewise, if they came to you as high or very high, your starting point is going to be down here. Does that make sense? Because again, this is similar to the modulation. If I have someone who poses a lower risk, my intervention can be a little less in intensity. But if I have someone who is higher risk, I'm going to want to pick from the stronger options up front. So that's really the major change there. Couple of things. Best practices show that your likelihood of success increases when you give your officers options for responding. But I understand that in doing that, we're saying to our workforce that we trust you, and I know a lot of people appreciate that, but I know that that also comes as a double-edged sword, because one of the questions we got back very commonly on this was, am I, as a pretrial services officer, going to now be held liable if the decision I make doesn't have the desired outcome? People specifically wanted to know if they'd be subject to challenges by attorneys, by judges, by anyone who reviewed their work. And the answer to that is no. Any officer's efforts will be protected and covered if they adhere to the policy options that the agency gives them. Okay? I understand that when I am the decision maker, it puts me in a much more central position. But what I want people to understand is that this final approved list of options will be approved by the agency. And what we're saying is that as long as you operate within here, you're going to be protected and you will not be subject to any more scrutiny by a court or by a judge or by any attorney, prosecutor, or defense that we are today. Okay? So I understand definitely that this is a shift, but what I want people to hear above all else is this is a shift that says we trust you. We believe you can make a better decision than we could map out on a piece of paper. We know that many of you have been sitting in these seats for years, and if you have not, you bring experience from elsewhere or from your professional training and or education that allow you to make well-informed decisions. And we believe that with the guidance of your supervisors, that you're going to be able to do this in a way that makes us all most successful. We also, in this same vein, were asked the question around whether moving to this would mean that PSOs were going to be held accountable if defendants went on to commit future crimes or miss court dates because of their recommendation. And the answer to that again is no. If you can demonstrate that you reasonably adhere to our policy, that's always going to be good enough for us. The thing that you need to understand is that in the law, pretrial is not required to prevent every arrest and make sure defendants make every scheduled court appearance. If you read the law, for us and other pretrial agencies, we are supposed to reasonably assure appearance in court and community safety. Reasonably assure. And the way that we reasonably assure that is by creating policies that should have the desired and intended effect. The way that you know that we are not being unreasonable is that we've set a target in the 80s, not at 100%. So you have to know going into this and today, we would never set the standard at no rearrests, no FTAs. It just wouldn't be prudent, it wouldn't be realistic, it wouldn't be science-based, not with a population of human beings, okay? So again, other questions that have come up around this are, what is my dashboard going to say with this? You will still have dashboard reminders. The dashboard will simply be reminding you to take action. It will not specify an action. It will likely specify the time frame within which you need to be responding, but it will not prescribe a specific action. So we do intend in our new system to have those reminders as aids to individuals who are doing supervision. The last question I think that jumped out at me on this particular topic was, how will we differentiate between those of us who are more law enforcement minded versus those of us who are social work minded, right? What if my colleague is very social work minded and I'm very law enforcement, law and order? Good question, but again, because this list will be the approved list, even if you are on one end of the spectrum that says law enforcement and I'm on the other end that says social work, all of these options are still going to be available to us. And honestly, the options aren't going to provide that much variation in terms of what you're going to be able to do when someone is assigned to a risk level. I would be more concerned about that if we did not give options and we just said, pick how you want to respond to things. Just do what you think is right. Go with your gut. Then I'd be more concerned. But because we're giving parameters and we're giving a ranked list that is segregated by risk level, I think we've placed sufficient controls in our system to account for even those of us who are the most social work oriented and those of us who are the most law enforcement and law and order oriented. Other questions about that? I think that's a key piece of understanding that we'll probably have a lot of conversation about as we move forward.